square bats. These are round bats designed for throwing on the wheel. You're also going to want to get yourself 2 to 4 pieces of clay. I only grabbed 2 today because I'm going to just be doing a quick demo. The pieces of clay you are going to want to wedge into a nice ball so they help you with the centering process. Anywhere from like a baseball to a softball size is going to be good. This clay is so cold. It was in the back room. The bigger the piece of clay, the harder it is going to be to center. So start with a smallish piece of clay to begin. Anything that I'm telling you today is also written on this chart here and that rainbow one up there. So as you're working on the wheel, if it's maybe January before you get to the wheel, you can definitely refer to those charts to remind you and refresh your memory of what to do and how to set up. You're going to want to get a little bucket with some water and a whole bunch of paper towels. It is really handy to have those there. You'll also want to get yourself an apron. It does get a little messy. These super fashionable aprons are designed for working on the wheel because they're really nice and long. They do have ties. You can tie behind your knees if you want to, or you can just leave them open. When you work on the wheel, you want to get your stool basically touching the wheel. You want your body to be as close as you can to the wheel itself, so you're using more of your upper body for leverage. All the wheels are slightly different design, but they should all clip together so the water doesn't leak out all over your legs. They all have a power switch, so you can see that one over there. It just looks like a little light switch that you turn on. And then there's only one button that's forward and reverse. You can control the direction of the spin based on if you're right-handed or left-handed. There is a pedal. So those of you who drive are going to be comfortable with this. It's similar to like a sewing machine, if you've ever used a sewing machine. You can move the pedal around where you want it, but you should always keep your foot on the pedal, just so if you do need to stop the wheel at any time, you don't have to go looking for it. Unlike a car, there's just one pedal. So it's just pressing down to speed up, and then to brake, you just put your heel down. Now, you can see right now the wheel is spinning clockwise. I am right-handed, so I want my wheel spinning counterclockwise. So always check that. You never know what the previous person had it set to. So just make sure that it's spinning the correct direction. Are you guys all right-handed? Yeah. Or is anyone left-handed? No. Okay, so that will make it easy when I give instruction today. You'll also need to attach the plastic bat to the wheel head. So this metal piece is the wheel head. We don't want to directly throw on here because if we make anything, it can be hard to remove your wet, soggy piece from the wheel. So that's why we leave it on the bat and we just take the bat off. So the bat needs to be securely attached to the wheel head. You'll see there are little pins here, and underneath the wheel or the bat, there are holes. There are 2 sets of holes. There's a narrow set and a wide set. These will match the wide set. For some of you, this might be the hardest thing that you do the whole time you're on the wheel, is just getting this attached. I like to kind of put my fingers on it and then kind of feel, and then just drop it in place and then push down so it's nice and secure. If this is, oops, see, like that wasn't on. If it's wiggling at all, it's gonna fly off as soon as you start the wheel. So make sure it's really secure, okay? Now, you might watch TikTok videos. I put together a playlist of tips and tricks for, like on YouTube for wheel work. You might see people throw directly on the wheel head. You might see people throw on wooden bats. It's a little different. We're using plastic bats. So when we stick our clay down, we want it to be dry. If there's water on here, the clay is just gonna slide around. So it's gotta be dry. So that's why the paper towels are handy. So if you have to put a new piece on, you can use a paper towel to dry it. I've taken all my jewelry off. I've got my sleeves rolled up because it will get a little bit messy.
Thank you.
So when you're ready to start, we want to get one piece of clay attached to as close to the center of the wheel as we can. Now, I see a lot of people go smash it down and go do with a lot of force. You don't need to be that aggressive with it. You want to try to get this as lined up as close to the middle of the bat as you can, because that's going to make the centering a bit easier. So I just kind of line it up where I want, and then I use my arm like a little lever and just smack it down. You can give it a few taps for good measure. And it's also sometimes nice just to pinch off the seam. So as I'm adding water, the water doesn't get underneath. If water gets underneath, this thing is going to come flying off. So first step is just to get the clay as close to the middle of the bat as I can. So that's a process called centering. Do you need a seatbelt over there?
No, I'm good,
okay.
I'm good.
You're gonna add water, okay? You want your clay to be spinning at kind of a medium fast speed. And you always wanna get your clay moving before you touch your hands on it. I don't wanna hold it and bring the clay up to speed because it's gonna throw things off. So my clay is spinning. I'm gonna come in. You can see I'm not just using my hands to do this. I'm gonna have my whole upper body and shoulders leaning up and over the clay. I'm tucked in as close as I can to the wheel itself. And I'm also gonna keep my elbows tucked into my hip creases. That's gonna make sure that I have a really nice stable base so I can get the clay centered in the middle of the bat. Got a lot of clay today. So this is gonna be a challenge. Don't be upset. Hey, Andrew, it's nice to see you. Don't be upset if this is frustrating. The first day you're on the wheel, you might just practice centering, and that's okay, all right? Like I said, there's no expectation that you make anything. It's just about the experience. So there are many different types of methods for centering. I'm gonna show you guys 3 that I find work pretty well. But like I said, if you watch TikTok videos or YouTube playlists, whatever, you'll find a million other options. So try what works for you. But the 3 techniques I find work well, the first is kind of like what I call a karate chop. So if you're right-handed, you're gonna use your left hand like a brace. The left hand is pushing in. The right hand is gonna come down on top of the clay and push down. So I've got force moving in and down at the same time. So again, I got my clay moving. I'm gonna add water. I got my body like a tripod, and I'm kind of squeezing in and pushing down at the same time. I'm gonna slowly release, and you can see how this is getting closer to the center. If slip is building up on your hands, that's a sign that you need to just continually add more water. You shouldn't have tons of clay building up on your hands, okay? The other option for centering is to stack your hands. You're gonna push down for a count of 5, release your hands, and then push away for a count of 5. And then you're just gonna kind of keep repeating that, push down, push away, push down, push away, and that should help the clay find its center. So again, I've got the clay spinning. I'm gonna, again, tuck my elbows in, push down, slowly and gently release, add water as necessary, stack my hands again, push away for a count of 5. Again, slowly release, push down, release, push away. And you can see how already the clay is looking way more centered. When it is perfectly centered, it's not gonna look like it's spinning at all. It's gonna just be moving really fast, but look like it's perfectly still. The third technique is called coning. This technique will have hands on both sides. I'm gonna squeeze my hands together from both directions. So that's gonna send the clay up like a big cone. And then I'm gonna take my hands and push down. And I can, again, repeat that. So again, all techniques, I'm really up close and personal with the clay. My elbows are tucked in. I'm gonna squeeze my hands together. You can see how that sent the clay up. And then I'm just gonna push down. I actually got this more off-center. Do you see that? See how it looks like it's bouncing a little bit? Okay, so I'm squeezing my hands together and then pushing down. Personally, I like the first technique that I showed you, where you're pushing in with one hand and down with the other. I find that technique works the best for me. Whatever you're doing though, you do want to be gentle about your approach to the clay and your release from the clay. You don't want to be aggressive, and like I said, you don't want to be holding on to the clay when you're starting up the wheel. You always want to get the clay moving first. Once the clay is centered, so this looks pretty good, right? It looks like it's stable, doesn't look like it's moving. Then we can move on to the next steps. So if we're following along on the chart, I've done step 2, which is centering. Step 3 is opening this up. So I want this to look more like a volcano than a big chunk of clay. So to open it up, again, my elbows are kind of tucked in for stability, and I'm gonna stack my hands and just kind of push my fingers down and into the clay. If it's getting dry, I can stop and add more water. And I don't want to push all the way down to the point where I'm touching the bat, but I want to leave a nice, maybe 1/4 inch, even more is fine. So I'm going to pull this off so you guys can see. And get the water out. Okay, see what that looks like? So right now it looks like a little volcano. I've got a little kind of hole at the bottom. Get this line back up. And if you're concerned about going too deep, you can have a needle tool nearby. So with the needle tool, you can kind of push your needle tool down, put your thumb up to the edge, and then pull out. And this will give you the depth of that clay. So I know it's not too thin. If it does get too thin, there's not a whole lot you can do to make it thicker. So just be really careful about not going too aggressive at the beginning. All right, set myself back up here. So now this looks like a volcano. I want the bottom of my bowl or cup or something to be flat though. I don't want the walls of my cup to come together like a V. So my next step is I need to flatten out the base. So to do that, again, I'm gonna get the wheel spinning. I'm gonna add some water. And again, I'm gonna stack my hands. And this time I'm just gonna pull my fingers back kind of towards my belly button just to level out that bottom. So again, my elbows are tucked in and I'm just pulling directly back towards me just to open up the base. I'm moving slowly and carefully just to flatten out that bottom. Let me blot out the water. Okay, see the difference now? Mm-hmm. So that base is nice and flat. Okay, what I don't want to do now is do any more work on the bottom. I've kind of got my bottom where I want it. So that bottom is pretty much done. All the clay is now kind of built up around these walls. So if I were to cut this away, this is kind of what it would look like at this point. The bottom is nice and flat and all the clay is kind of contained in these side walls. So my next step is now to start pulling. So I'm on step 4 for those of you following along on the chart. At this point, once the clay is opened up, I only want to touch the clay and interact with it between 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock. So if I think of my clay, my bat, like a wheel, or like a clock, sorry, 12 is up here, 6 is here. This quadrant is kind of my, my like safe space, okay? If I start manipulating the clay out here, because of the spin of the wheel and that centrifugal force, it's more likely to whip out of control. I have a little bit more control in this sweet spot between 3 and 6 o'clock. So as I start pulling up to make my pot bigger, I'm only gonna touch the clay here. That means my right hand is gonna be on the outside and my left hand is gonna be on the inside. So every time I touch my pot, I'm only touching here to here. So let me show you what that looks like. Again, I'm gonna get my clay moving. I'm gonna get it wet. This time I wanna pull that clay up a little bit just to spread out those thick walls. I don't want a cup or a vase or a bowl that has walls that are like 1 inch thick. So I'm gonna start pulling up. I'm gonna kind of hook my finger in. Again, the clay is moving. I'm approaching the clay gently. My left hand is on the inside, guiding the clay out towards my right hand. And I'm just lifting and pulling straight up. Oh, I had a lot of slip built up on the walls, so I'm just gonna wipe that off. Okay? So you can see now the walls are still too thick, but they're getting more even. So each time I'm gonna repeat this, I'm just gonna kind of pull up just to spread out the thickness of those walls. At this point, I'm not trying to shape it. In fact, as this piece gets bigger, it's gonna be more likely to break. So I wanna keep this as tight as I can at the beginning, and only at the end, once the walls are kind of shaped and thinned out the way I want, then I'll shape it. So again, I'm adding water, getting my clay moving, approaching, my elbows are still tucked in. I'm just gonna pull. Again, when I'm pushing with my left hand, it's supporting with my right hand, and I'm just bringing it straight up. As I release, I'm gonna very gently kind of release my hands, okay? So now my walls are a pretty good thickness. If I wanted to shape this, I could. So let's say I did want to make more like a big cereal bowl or something. I can do that just by, again, pushing out, but supporting with my outside hand. So if I wanted to open this up, I can just pull, but again, it's supported on the outside.
Please pardon the interruption. You can ignore that bell. We will look into why it went off inadvertently.
Okay, there was no bell, but thank you.
Here we go.
All right, so once you're at this point, be really careful. It is easy when you get your piece opened up like this to knock it off track. So I'm gonna destroy this one just for the sake of like demo. It's fine, it didn't take me that long. So what's gonna happen for you guys, you wanna be careful about not thinning out the clay too much. As the clay gets thin, like this, I'm making a thin spot. It's gonna not be able to support the clay above. See how it's starting to rock and roll a little bit? And now that thin spot has just resulted in the piece kind of collapsing on itself. It happens. You learn just as much from the pieces that don't go well. So if this happens to you, you've got a little wooden stick you can kind of use to kind of cut and scrape this off. And then because you prepped a few pieces of clay, you're ready just to kind of keep going on. So at the end of your wheel session, you're gonna collect all this gooey clay. This can't be re-wedged. It's so soft and so floppy that you have to let it dry out before it can be used again. So if you look right where Nick is, there's a plaster bat and there's a collection of clay from yesterday afternoon. All of that clay was wet and gooey like this. I'm gonna let it sit probably this afternoon. I'll re-wedge it and it can be used again after it's dried out. So that plaster bat is dry, so it will help absorb the moisture. What you guys can do when you're working as a group is just kind of collect everyone's really gooey clay, and then one person at the end can just bring it over there. You have a bunch of paper towels. So this right now is too wet to put my next piece on, so you can use the clay, or sorry, use the wheel to help you dry off the bat. And then when that middle is dry, you're good to re-wedge and get started. At the end of your work session, we want to be really mindful about cleanup. So I have this bucket here that's on wheels. So you can wheel this over to where you're working. We've talked a lot about how we don't have clay go down the sink, right? So this bucket is your first step for cleaning up. You can see all the water will rise to the top, and then I can pour the water off. The clay will settle to the bottom, and I can collect that and let it dry out to the point where it becomes plastic clay again. Or we can use it for slip. So what you want to do, oh, let me grab a rag.
You're not in it. Do you want to be?
First step to cleaning up is if your hands are dirty, wash your hands. So you can use this bucket and just kind of wipe your hands down. It is smelly. You guys know that the clay has kind of an eggy sulfur smell, but it's not gonna hurt you. Let the wheel do most of the work for the cleanup. So I've got a nice damp rag. I'm gonna let the rag do the work here. I'm gonna take the bat off. Sometimes slip gets built up around the corners, so I'm just gonna wipe that down. This wheel head is mostly clean, but the edges are pretty dirty. So I'm gonna start in the middle. Just watch yourself on those pegs. It does hurt, so just be careful that your fingers are protected with the rag. A lot of clay builds up on the sides of the wheel head, so make sure you get that clean. Once the wheel head is clean, then you can go ahead and separate your sides. All this slippy water gets dumped in here. You can use your sponge. You can see I'm just gonna wipe out all the slip right into the bucket. So when I go over to the sink, my piece looks like this. It just needs a rinse off. It doesn't need washing in the sink. I'll do the same thing with the other half. I'll do the same thing with my little green bucket and all my tools. Okay, you guys don't need to sit here for 5 minutes and watch me clean up. So I'll do that after. Again, if you're working together, it can be handy to have one person clean everything in the bucket. It can be helpful to have one person at the sink. Someone else can take the rag and wipe down the deck, so when people come back, things are clean and you can just let them air dry in place. There is a green mop because it will splash, so you can use that to kind of clean up the floor, and then make sure that things are reset for the next group. Just watch if things splash on the walls or on the stools, just take your rag and kind of wipe those things down too. The aprons are not like for you to wipe your hands on. I put them in the washing machine, and if clay gets in the washing machine, it can gum up the washing machine itself. So try to use paper towels to get all the slip off, or use this bucket to wash your hands. Don't rely on just your apron to wipe your hands. If the aprons aren't too dirty, they can get hung up and reused multiple times. At the end of your work session, you're gonna want to get that green paper that is for wheel work. We talked about that a few weeks ago when we went over everything. And make sure you write kind of your observations from the day. So you'll write the date, the time of your work session, and you'll kind of say, oh, I really struggled with centering. At the end, I made something, but it fell apart because it got too big and it got weak and it collapsed, right? So you'll just kind of write notes to yourself about how your work session went. At the end of your 3 work sessions, if you make something, that's great, and that will be a bonus grade, but if you don't make anything, it won't count against you. But everyone has to write a short reflection essay, about 3 paragraphs. I've detailed what is going to be in that reflection essay on that green sheet and on the rubric on Classroom. That reflection essay is your summative grade for the wheel experience, okay? So each day on the wheel is a formative, and then your summary at the end is your summative. Make sense? Okay, so you can decide when and how you want to fill or use your time and fill in those days. If you want to sign up for the days today, you can. Definitely, Calissa, we're